Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be going over basically setting up my custom operating system. So I'm going to go over both version 3, which is free, and version 4, which is on my Patreon. So if you're interested in that, please look in the description down below and you'll get a link to my Patreon. It's just $5 and you can play around with an even better custom operating system. All right, so let's dig into the specifics, and yeah, I'll tell you how to get a base map up and running, and then you can tune from there. So you see here on the PCMHacking.net website, right here, you go to the GM PCM, and then right now, version 2 is the one that's sticky, but hopefully somebody will be able to bump that up because I'm not a moderator on that site. But eventually there's version 3. So you go to version 3 and there's some details on there, but this video is basically duplicating the information that's there. But you'll basically just want to go ahead and download this zip file. And then you'll have all the files that you need. So the first thing you'll want to have is a base file. So you need basically a factory operating system, or one that's already patched with a version 2 or a version 3 if you're upgrading from 3 to 4. So you need a base map. The only operating system that this is compatible with is 1258603, I think, is the operating system. Let me just look. Yeah, so 1258603. It's only supporting the P59 or 1 megabyte PCM, and just due to the limitations of the size of how many changes I'm making, I can't actually fit this in the P01 PCM. So that's why I'm just not continuing to support it going beyond version 2. Now, once you have a base file, and I'll just copy a base file to my desktop. Okay, so now I have my base file for 125870603 operating system. On my desktop, I have the Boost OS patcher, which will apply my custom operating system to your tune file. I have the DLL file that will update checksums and basically allow you to use Tuner Pro and not have any issues. And then the XDF is also for Tuner Pro. So once we get the tune file patched, then we'll be able to make changes in the Tuner Pro. So first we'll open up the Boost OS patcher, and it's just a command line interface. So it's very simple operation. Basically asks you to enter the file name. So you need to have this patch file in the same directory as your tune file. So on your desktop or in a folder, they just have to be in the same place. I basically just need to type in the file. So if I just click on this guy, Control A, Control C, and then I can right click in here and it basically pastes it for me. I don't have to type it out. I don't have to worry about misspelling something. Hit enter, and then it will pop up with all the different operating systems that you basically can upgrade to. So this one, because it's from the PCM Hacking website, it only gives version 3 as the highest version to upgrade to. But if you go to Patreon, you can download a version of this software that allows you to upgrade to a custom operating system version 4. I forget what minor revision, but you can see I've gone through a couple minor revisions with some bug fixes. Basically, you just want to use the highest revision. So here, you basically just want to hit 1, hit enter, and then you need to enter the output file name. So I'll just put patched tune.bin, hit enter, and then you can see here it saved that file to my desktop. And I can just hit enter again, and it closes the command line interface. So now I have my patched tune. Now, technically, you can actually flash this directly to your vehicle and nothing should change. So if your vehicle ran with this tune file, it should also run with the patch tune file, but none of the custom features will be enabled. So that's where we need to get into Tuner Pro and enable some of those features depending on what you want to do with your application. So I actually have Tuner Pro already open up. I just need to select my XDF. So I'll go to the desktop, click that version 3.4 XDF, and then I want to open my bin file. So open bin, also go to the desktop, open up my patch tune. And now this XDF and tune file are loaded into Tuner Pro. Now I can go ahead and make any changes I want. There's a bunch of standard folders that I included from a kind of an open XDF to allow people to have one location to make a bunch of changes. But all of my custom operating system changes are in this Boost OS version 3 or version 4, depending on which XDF you have open. And you need to make sure that you're using the version 3 XDF with the version 3 software. There is some compatibility, but some parameters aren't there anymore, or they no longer function. So you want to make sure you use the correct version of XDF. And you can go into calibration info and look at the operating system ID, and you can see that here I actually modify the operating system ID to a 7603 and then 00 blah, whatever the version of the patch is. So it only has the major version, not the minor version. We could start getting into basically the tuning parameters or what you want to enable as far as new features. Okay, so we'll just start at the top folder, which is labeled as Boost Tables. This is, in my opinion, primarily why most people would want to upgrade to this. It would basically allow for a VE table that goes above 105 kPa. So you'll see here, this is a flag that allows you to select which VE table you want. So if you leave it at 0, it's just using the factory VE table, which is in these engine calibration folder. And then if you want to upgrade to the 2-bar or 4-bar volumetric efficiency table, you basically just put a 1 in for 2-bar or a 2 in for 4-bar. So it's just basically selecting which VE table you want to use. And then you can just pop this VE table open, and it's zeroed out, but you can copy or paste, or however you want to do it, enter the values for the VE values. The one nice thing with the 2-bar is you can directly copy a stock VE table into this table. It's basically the same size up to 105 kPa. So this is the stock size of the VE table for an NA application. And then I basically just increase the size of the VE table so you can extrapolate, or however you want to do it, to give yourself a base map for the VE table. So simple enough. And then the only other folder I have the only other table I have in here is for a Boost Spark adder, I call it. So a lot of the Spark tables that I have in here, I call them as adders. So you want to use the Spark as a positive or negative value, depending on if you want to add timing or remove timing. I just basically have it in the operating system adding the value from this table. So the correct way, in my opinion, to use this table is to use negative values at whatever boost level you want to start removing timing. So this is basically allowing you to vary the timing above, into boost. So it starts at 105 kPa and goes up to 425 kPa, and you can type in, so here you want to type in, -5, and then here you want to type in -10, and then you can interpolate between those two, and it will pull, variable amount of timing starting at 205 kPa. So just an example. I'm not going to save changes because this is just an example. And then the one big thing is boost control. So this is definitely, this feature was not in the version 2. This was a new feature for version 3. Fairly simple, but it does allow for some flexibility for boost control. Obviously, there's an on-off enable. It shows you basically the recommended MAC valve that I would recommend using, and I'm going to wind up using on my Firebird. And it also shows you how to wire it into the PCM. So you want to look at that note. and also, like it says, review all of these tables and values to make sure you have them filled out, or else it may not work as expected. I do include a default boost control solenoid frequency of 25 hertz. You can look online. It's recommended between 20 and 30 hertz. Varying the frequency does give you some more or less granularity in how it works, but I would just start at 25, and then if you want to play with it later, I would worry about it later if it's not working as intended. The next thing is the base duty cycle. So this is going to pulse at this duty cycle between 0 and 100%, based on manifold pressure and RPM. So, and it's going to look at this table no matter what. So even when you're not in boost, it's going to be looking at this first row. I can get into more specifics in how to tune boost control, but there's probably a bunch of other videos that have this similar table in standalone PCMs and potentially even factory computers that have this similar type of table. So you may just want to look more into how you can control boost control with a manifold pressure versus engine RPM. And this is a open loop, so there is no target boost. It's pretty much just, it's going to run a duty cycle, and there's no feedback loop. I thought about doing that in a future version, but there is a lot of tuning involved with those closed loop systems. You kind of have to put a lot more work into it, and I figured this would be a little bit more attainable for people because of how long it takes to flash the PCM between iterations. This kind of can get you going, but it won't take forever to tune. So beyond the base duty cycle, there's only really a couple multipliers. So this throttle position multiplier, in my opinion, is a really huge help. So at 0% throttle, or idle or whatever, you can have it 0. So these first few rows, you can just have a 0, and then as you give more throttle, you can crank up that multiplier. So in this, I think I have it as 0 to 1. Yeah, okay, 0 to 1. So I don't know why Tuner Pro doesn't, put the maximum value in there whenever you're just playing with it. But whenever you try and save, if the value isn't sticking and it doesn't tell you the minimum and maximum values, I'm not sure why it doesn't do that. Maybe I should update the XDF to list the min and max value that you're allowed to enter. I put limits to try and stop people from screwing things up. In most cases, I think I have the values pretty good, but if you always want to leave a comment, I can always modify them if necessary. So like I said, if we wanted to go ahead and fill up here with ones, and then below have it do an interpolate between those guys, so above 20%, it'll start feeding in the duty cycle from the base duty cycle table, so that it's not going to be pulsing that while you're not trying to get on it. And then one actual really nice feature, in my opinion, is this actually will also work when the engine is off. For temporary test, you can flash so that this lower area is actually 100% duty cycle. And you may just want to leave it like that, but you got to make sure that you have this lower portion of the TPS range at 0, and then it will basically not pulse the solenoid when you're not hitting the throttle. But then, if you have this area at 100%, so if I have this at 100, then whenever it's off but key on, I can push the throttle, and you'll be able to hear the pulsing of the solenoid. The other multiplier is this flex fuel. So the flex fuel table, if you don't have flex fuel enabled, this table won't function. You won't have to worry about putting any values in here. But if you do have flex fuel enabled on your tune, which up in the engine calibration, you can look flex fuel enabled. So in this tune, it is enabled. So if this, is enabled, then this table will function, and you want to make sure if you are actually using it or actually want to use it, you can, vary basically the max or it's a multiplier. So again, 0 to 1. So if you don't want to have any boost control on until you have at least 50% alcohol, then you can just leave these 0, and then above 50 or 60 you can put a 1. So you can basically make the boost control not function unless you have flex or ethanol content above a certain level, or have 50% or something, and then you could do whatever you want. But I thought that was a good option. And then the last feature is over boost duty cycle cut threshold. So basically, this is kind of in line with how my Innovate wideband and boost controller work that I have in the truck. Is it will cut the duty cycle to the boost control solenoid if it goes over a certain kPa, which I think the default value I have. Oh no, I had the default value as 0. So if you do enable boost control, you'll want to basically put this value in basically the max boost that you really ultimately want to make. And then up here is really only for if you're running a wideband. So it's a lean boost cut safety. So you need to have the wideband enabled to actually look at these parameters. So we'll come back to that in a second. And then in here, closed loop fueling disabled. That was really for if you want to run pretty much open loop fueling. That's either with the narrowband or with the wideband. So you can basically turn off closed loop if you want to do some tuning. I just wanted to add that little flag in there in the code so it's a little bit easier. And then wideband closed loop is for basically if you want to use wideband instead of the narrowband. So these will disable the narrowband sensors and use the wideband. Now you'll need to wire in the wideband, and like here it shows the wiring. So you'll need a separate wideband controller, and you need to wire it in just like these notes. And then the input voltage selection is kind of not the best thing. I actually fixed this in version 4, and we'll go over that when I get to version 4. This basically allows you to use 2 widebands, an Innovate or a AEM have these default values for basically the 0 to 5 volt to lambda based on how it's calibrated. Yeah, you basically just need to set if your wideband meets one of these 2 selections, then you can pick either not set or set depending on your application. And then the wideband input ready is pretty much I've seen quite a few widebands where below 0.5 volts or above 4.5 volts it would be in an error condition. So you wouldn't really want to use that information for closed loop fueling. So you can edit these values to basically between these values are only when closed loop will use the wideband. If your wideband faults, like I think the Innovative, it faults below 0.5 volts based on default. You can modify these settings in the widebands, but it will go into an error condition and it'll drop down to like close to 0 volts. So if it goes below 0.5, the computer will stop using the wideband, so it won't go crazy with the closed loop trims. Really, the only other thing is the PID settings. So these are pretty much a duplicate of the narrowband PID settings. It's just I basically put them in here for lambda. So this left axis is lambda error rather than they had in the stock tables. They're basically some millivolts for and it really doesn't correlate directly because it's not a great narrowbands aren't very good as far as like their accuracy of error. It's just basically, is it rich or is it lean? But here you can see exactly how rich or how lean, and you can modify these tables. I've actually run it with the stock tables, just putting around, and it trims really nicely. It pulls the fueling back into line. I haven't run a bunch of wide open throttle, but I plan to later this year really dig into this and see if these stock default values for a wideband, closed loop is going to work. So you can see those, proportional and integral, and it's based on closed loop mode and the lambda error, and there's a separate one for idle, so you can tweak just for idle. For closed loop, I also added a feature where if you have boost control enabled and you have the wideband closed loop enabled, if it goes lean while you're in boost, it will cut duty cycle. So in this sub table in the boost control, if you have a manifold pressure where above this manifold pressure, it will look at the air-fuel ratio and see if it needs to cut the duty cycle. So typically I would put this, slightly above the wastegate pressure that your vehicle is running, because it will only drop back down to wastegate. So you might as well not activate the check until you're into boost. So, say if you have a 5 or 6 pound spring, set it at, 6 or 7 PSI or whatever KPA that would be. And then this would be the lambda value that if it goes above this lambda value, it will cut the boost control. So if, say you want a target lambda of 0.8, then if you put 0.8 lambda in here, 180 kPa, above 180 kPa, it will start looking at this air-fuel ratio. And then if it goes above that or leaner than what you want, it will cut duty cycle. It will basically turn the boost control duty cycle off. And then that should let the boost drop back down, so that, the operator or whatever should know that it's saving the engine from going lean in boost. The launch control is applicable for both version 3 and version 4. I haven't really tweaked the launch control very much. There's one parameter I pretty much added for launch control in version 4. So you can basically enable it with this flag. It works based on vehicle speed, so you need a vehicle speed sensor. We don't need one, but it can help. And there's ways around. You can basically tune these parameters out, but they do help with being able to only have the launch control enable when you want it to enable. Launch control max speed, so this is going to not be able to enable launch control when the vehicle speed is above a certain mile per hour that you put in here. I think I put like 5 miles an hour in here, so once I start moving, it doesn't allow launch control to enable. There's a minimum throttle position, so I think I had mine at 60 or 70%, and you could put it lower or higher. So you need to be able to push the throttle basically hard enough so that it gets the engine into launch control. And then engine speed limit, this is going to be the actual cut above this. Once the engine reaches above this RPM, it will start cutting ignition. These vehicle speed and throttle position, and then the only other parameter is basically you need to be pushing the brake. So there need to be some input that basically said, okay, I need to enable launch control. Now, if you have the stock PCM in a factory application, there's usually a brake switch that is already there. It's wired up. So if you're pushing the brake, it's going to work just like stock. You just push the brake and you hit the gas, and it will enter launch control as long as the vehicle speed and throttle position are met. And if it's a stick shift, it uses the clutch switch. So again, if you're in a factory application, if the clutch switch is wired like factory, it will use the factory clutch switch to enable launch control instead of the brake if it's a manual application. So a couple tables that you can tweak. Okay, so a couple tables that I have added for launch control. So launch control, spark adder versus manifold pressure. This is going to pretty much allow you to modify timing when you're in launch controls by the amount that you put in this table. So based on manifold pressure, you can add or remove timing. You can add timing with positive values or remove timing with negative values. I use this for pretty much a pseudo like boost builder. I start pulling timing once it's built a little bit of boost, and then I start, as it builds more and more boost, it gets closer and up. I keep pulling timing slowly, and that basically adds exhaust energy to the turbine side of the turbo, and basically is firing the spark plug later so that flame front is going into the turbine a little bit more. There's a lot more expansion of the gases into the turbo, gets the turbo spooling a little bit more, and then it just kind of compounds. As long as you don't pull too much timing, then the engine will, you reduce torque if you pull timing too quickly, and then it won't build boost actually. So you have to play around with that. So you want to do it, in my opinion, like kind of in a smooth curve. But again, you could do whatever you want with this table. It's there for however you want to use it. And then launch control spark adder versus time. So this can be used for pretty much, in my opinion, traction control limited situations. So this table is active only if you get out of launch control by letting go of the brake or by letting go of the clutch. So if you let go of the gas and are still holding the brake or the clutch and it goes below the minimum throttle position, this table will not be used. But if you basically have a validated launch, i.e. like the clutch or the brake gets let go and everything else was fine as far as like the vehicle speed and the throttle position, it will start using this table. And it will use this table until either it hits this maximum 4 seconds, it's only functions for 4 seconds, or you let go of the throttle below the minimum position. So basically, if you get out of the gas, this table will deactivate. I use this table for launching because my truck makes quite a bit of torque, and it has a 4L60 has a pretty steep first gear ratio, and also it has a stock camshaft, so it makes a lot of torque down low, and it has a pretty tight converter. So I pull some torque out by pulling some timing in this very initial section of the launch, and then ramp it back in. But yeah, you can use this for, if you have a situation where you're at a track where it has a bump or something and you want to pull timing for, a quarter of a second at, this area or something, you can do that. There's other uses for this table too. But that's pretty much all for launch control. And this is all spark cut. So it doesn't, the only thing that it does is whenever the RPM goes above this engine speed limit, it will cut spark, and it can be pretty aggressive. So that's why I have tweaked this for version 4. So we'll get to that when we get to version 4 and the changes in version 4. Flat foot shift, I haven't really tweaked this much. I actually haven't had anybody that has shown me that they have used this, but it works similar to launch control. So you have to enable it. This will only work for manual vehicles. So it needs to be, the transmission type needs to be set to a manual. And the vehicle speed is actually a minimum. So you need to be above a certain vehicle speed before this will activate. You need to be above a certain throttle position. And then you need to specify the limit of, for the engine speed. So most, for this application would be a stick shift. You basically are, flooring it. You're in, first gear, you're flooring it. You basically allow you to hit the clutch. When you hit the clutch switch, that's when this will activate, and it will cut spark until the engine is below the engine speed limit. So you have to play with where you want it to cut back to. But that basically will have the RPMs drop while you're still holding the throttle 100%. But again, I haven't had anyone actually use this, so I haven't tested it, but I am pretty sure that it should work because it uses a lot of the same type of code as the launch control. Spark cut limiter is pretty simple. It basically just allows you for a max engine speed as opposed to the fuel cut, the factory fuel cut. This is a spark cut. So again, just enable it, and then you pick the the RPM that you want it to cut at. And then one of the other big ones is the desired air fuel. So the desired air fuel feature basically gets rid of power enrichment. The stock power enrichment system is kind of pretty limiting in terms of the target air fuel ratio that you want to hit, especially if you have closed loop fueling. My opinion, adding the closed loop fueling, I really wanted to be able to have a better target air fuel, and also have a couple other tweaks with the system. So again, you'll basically want to enable this if you want to use this feature. But pretty much the E0 is for basically pump gas, and then E80 would be if you're using flex fuel. If you don't have flex fuel enabled, then this E80 table isn't necessary. And this table, if you read the notes, is in lambda. I chose to use lambda as opposed to an EQ ratio, just because it's something I'm more familiar with, and I'm trying to take these pieces of software updates and more gear them towards what a standalone uses. There's no standalone that I've ever seen that uses an EQ ratio, and it's just factory systems, and maybe even just GM that uses that. So I've geared this towards going towards a standalone type application where this is a lambda value. And because both of these tables, I don't want to use a gasoline air fuel ratio because this is for ethanol. So it would be weird if it was in gasoline, in my opinion. So yeah, so these tables basically are a target air fuel ratio. So you cannot target leaner than stoic or 1. You can only target richer. If you're using flex fuel, it will basically interpolate between these values. If you don't have 80% ethanol, it will blend with the stock blend table between these two tables. And I've also allowed the ability to have a leaner air fuel ratio for the ethanol, because right now with the stock operating system, you cannot use a leaner air fuel ratio for the EQ table in the stock OS. But I've tweaked the code so that you can actually have a leaner air fuel ratio for E85, and then for pump gas you can have a richer air fuel ratio, and it will use the appropriate one. So that's pretty much all of the features that I have for version 3. This is getting to be a significantly long video, so hopefully I'll be able to edit a lot of this out. But let me go ahead and open up the version 4 base file, and then I'll also open up the version 4 XDF, and then we can take a look at the differences. Okay, so now I have the version 4 bin file and also the version 4 XDF, and I'll jump into the differences. So you can see here, Boost OS version 4. One main table that I added, or one value, was I put in a overboost spark cut. So I thought that the overboost for the boost control, where it cut the duty cycle, was good. But if you have a mechanical failure and the boost, like say you melt your wastegate line, cutting duty cycle isn't going to help anything. So I wanted to have a little bit more protection, that you could set the boost a little bit higher, where you are kind of sure you don't expect the boost to get up that high, but it does go that high. You want a safety. So it will cut spark and hopefully let the driver or operator know that, hey, something is wrong. It just cut when it shouldn't, so I should get out of the throttle. So it could cause issues if you're staying on the cut when you shouldn't. But I thought about doing some sort of latching thing where if it would kind of let the RPM drop below a certain level and then ramp back in or something. But Yeah, so it doesn't do anything now. It would just spark cut until the boost gets below the level that you set in here. I have it maxed out by default, so it's not enabled by default. And yeah, you basically just want to set that where you really don't want the boost to go above. So nothing's changed for version 4 in the boost control. Everything's pretty standard. Same thing. Most things in closed loop fueling, there's a couple things that I added. So all of these are the same. The wideband input ready is the same. The wideband not ready delay is added. There can be large fluctuations in the wideband reading, but those could be due to transients. If you have, a transient tip in or whatever, where it potentially goes outside of these ready voltages, say you have a lean spike or a rich spike, but you don't want to get out of closed loop fueling for that, instant and reset all of the, the values that for closed loop. I have it basically not jump out of closed loop for a set period of time. So if you want to put in, a quarter of a second in here, that could keep the system in closed loop so that it doesn't reset. I'm not sure if that's really needed, but I'll probably play around with that whenever I get to testing more. One huge thing that I added for version 4 is the wideband calibration. So wideband calibration basically allows you to use pretty much any wideband on the market as long as it outputs a 0 to 5 volts. So for my wideband, I have default values in here for an Innovate wideband. So that's what I'm running. At 0 volts, at 0.5 lambda, the wideband will output 0 volts. And at 1.5 lambda, it will output 5 volts. So then it uses, a linear interpolation between those two. But for an AEM, or I think like Ballinger, there's like 14.7. I think there's some other widebands. They may not use that same value. So you can basically calibrate the wideband to the one that you're using. And before with version 3, you could only use 2, Innovate and AEM. So I thought that was a huge upgrade. And then if you want, I'm not sure exactly how you'd go about doing it, but you could offset for, voltage offsets between the wideband display and what you're, able to see in your log. Yeah, that's pretty much all for closed loop. And then really there's only a couple other features that I added. So for launch control, I thought the spark cut was a little bit harsh. So I wanted to add a spark retard. I thought about it in a little bit different of a way. So there's basically, I've added a soft limiter, which will pull timing above an engine RPM. So say we have an example. Let's go ahead in here and enable launch control. Let's set the max speed to 5 miles an hour. So only enable above 5 mile an hour and 70% throttle. Let's set the soft limit 2,900 RPM, and then the hard limit at 3,000, and then the soft limit retard. So say I want to pull 5 degrees. So that's going to pull 5 degrees of timing. But the way that it's going to work, it may be a little different from how some people would expect. But the way I wanted to do it was in this example, at 2,900 RPM, it will pull no timing and it will not have any spark cut. But at 3,000 RPM, it will be pulling 5 degrees, and above that, it will be basically cutting ignition. So at 2,950 RPM, it will be pulling 2.5 degrees. So it will proportionally use this soft limit retard between the soft limit and the hard limit. So it kind of adds a variable engine retard leading up to the spark cut, so that you could hold the engine back proportionally, kind of a little bit, before you just cut spark. So I used this in my last video. I set it up, and I think it made the launch control a little bit more stable, even though I was just doing it in park and there was no load. I think for a manual car, it would really help because you don't have any load that's really for launch, unless you're like, putting a little bit of load with like an e-brake and you're slowly pulling the clutch out to load up the drivetrain. You don't have any load. So yeah, that's just a feature I thought that could be helpful for some people. And then I actually added the same thing for the spark limiter for the engine max speed, so that it's not going to go up and hit really hard on the hard cut. You can, kind of soften it by pulling, say if you wanted to pull 10, 15 degrees the last 50 RPM before the engine limiter, so that it's, you decelerate it so it doesn't hit it as hard, because, obviously a lot of spark cut can be bad on a lot of parts in an engine. So trying to pull torque out before you do spark cut is probably a good idea. So I thought that was a good feature to add in for both of those, basically spark cut limiters, the launch control, and then the engine speed max. Nothing changed with desired air fuel. And then I added pretty much a whole new folder. This is for the guys that want to run mass airflow sensor still. The way that I did this is, I could have probably done it a couple different ways, but the way I decided to do it was, I imagine for most guys that are still using mass airflow sensor are generally going to upgrade to a Gen 4 mass airflow sensor. So that's what I pretty much called this feature is a Gen 4 mass airflow sensor, table. There's a couple things in here, but it basically, you have to enable it. And what this enable flag does is enables this Gen 4 calibration table for the mass airflow sensor. Now the Gen 3 mass airflow sensor uses different values, so you can't use, a Gen 3 table in here. You pretty much have to grab a Gen 4 calibration from, a Gen 4 PCM, and then obviously you can tune it, later on. You can calibrate it for your application, but you can start with a Gen 4 table if you're using a mass airflow sensor from, a Corvette or whatever, and you use the tube and everything. It can give you a base tune that's pretty close. And then the other thing this does is it basically gets rid of the limit on the mass airflow sensor airflow max. So this will allow you to go up significantly higher than what the Gen 3, I forget what the value is, but I think I doubled it. So you'll be able to have mass airflow values double, so you basically won't have to scale your tune. This will get rid of the, you have to scale your airflow and scale all your torque tables and all that stuff, and then your logging parameters will be all wrong. Like, done. You don't have to do that. You just put a Gen 4 MAF in the car and everything will work just like factory. You won't be able to log the mass air parameter because it's only so big. It will still cap out, but potentially I'll make another video where you can use PCM logger, where you can log a RAM address, where you can log the basically 4-byte mass airflow value. And then the other feature I had in here was really, I guess maybe I should have put this in a different folder. This is basically to disable the MAF. If you want to run speed density mode, you can basically disable the mass airflow fueling, and you don't have to have the mass airflow fail, and basically gets rid of all that. It will just, no matter what, it will remove all of the calculations that add the mass airflow value into the fueling calculation in the code. So yeah, that's pretty much the changes for version 4. It can add a whole lot of features, and they are good features in my opinion, but let me know what you think. I have some ideas for version 5. I've got a few jotted down. I've been thinking about getting rid of the spark tables that use gram per cylinder. I thought about just getting rid of those and adding new spark tables for engine RPM versus manifold pressure, kind of just going more towards standalone. Everything's based on manifold pressure rather than, a load value. Even though there are some advantages to using load value, I think it's a little bit more confusing. So, people that are more familiar with a standalone could just, map a car up with a engine RPM versus manifold pressure and all spark values and, use that. So let me know what you think. If you have other ideas for a version 5 that I could, start working on, let me know. And, if you're interested in version 4, check out my Patreon. Appreciate the support, and we'll see you guys later.